Hi, welcome to a discussion with Nancy Pickard. I'm Bruce Southworth, a mystery book reviewer for Once Upon a Crime Mystery Books in Minneapolis. And as I said, our guest today is Nancy Pickard. She is the creator of the Cain mystery series based in Port Frederick, Massachusetts. To date, there have been 8 Jenny Cain books, starting with Generous Death in 1984, and most recently, But I Wouldn't Want to Die There, just published in 1993. Nancy is also a founding member of Sisters in Crime and a past president of that group. So welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. Nice to see you.
I was wondering, Generous Death appeared in 1984, and I know that you had a short story that appeared in 1979 called Afraid All the Time.
Oh my gosh, you found that one.
I'm curious if there was anything in between, any writing that you were doing.
Well, let's see, 1979, Afraid All the Time, I believe, actually was a story that appeared later, and the story that we're really referring to is a story that was in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. It was the first fiction I ever had published, and there wasn't anything in between except for maybe one tiny little short story in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, because that was the period of when I was getting rejections that writers go through. And so I had one story published to begin with, and I thought, well, this is easy. I'll get my first book published and life will be grand. And then I discovered that it's not as easy as that.
There was that dry spell, and then all of a sudden,
right.
Generous Death hit. So how did I understand correctly that you're a newspaper reporter? You have that background?
Well, I have that background very briefly. I have a journalism degree, actually radio TV journalism, from the University of Missouri years and years ago. And I worked for a couple of years out of J School at a local newspaper, and by local I mean in the Kansas City area, which is where I'm from. I did that long enough to figure out that I'm not cut out to be a journalist. And then I worked for a corporation doing corporate writing, and then I freelanced for a long time until I was suddenly just overcome one day by the desire to do nothing but write fiction for the rest of my life.
How did you decide on the mystery genre?
I have been a reader all my life of all sorts of fiction, everything from the wildest experimental fiction to mainstream fiction. But the one consistent factor all through my reading life has been mystery, starting with Nancy Drew, or going further back to the Bobbsey twins, for those who remember the twins. And so when I started to write fiction, I thought, the form of the novel is really the one with which I am most familiar, and I felt the most comfortable. And what I've discovered is I'm essentially a one-trick pony. People say, do you want to write other things? And I don't. I just want to write mysteries. The sorts of mysteries I want to write, that changes a bit as the years go by. For instance, there's a book out in the past year, Turtle Moon by Alice Hoffman. And Alice Hoffman is not a mystery writer, but I adore that book. And it is a mystery, but the mystery is only about 10% of the book, and the rest of the book is essentially character-driven. And I would like to think that as I develop through the years as a writer, that I will get closer and closer to that kind of mystery, because that's the kind of book I'm more interested in reading and therefore in writing.
I would say you're on the right track, judging from my reading of your books. It does seem as though Generous Death, which we have a copy here, the first book is more mystery-oriented. Who killed the philanthropists that are being knocked off one by one? Whereas through But I Wouldn't Want to Die There, particularly my own favorite, IOU, deals more with personal issues and so on. So it seemed to me, anyway, that you're tracking in that direction.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, I think for readers who really love traditional mysteries that are entirely plot-driven, that are puzzle mysteries, that's not good news. But my feeling is that what's going on in mysteries is less and less of that traditional kind of puzzle mystery and more of mysteries that encompass not only character-driven stories, but a lot of emotion as well, which I don't think used to be the case in mysteries. Do you?
No, it certainly seemed to be more hard-boiled, and we have to talk to so-and-so, and then go to so-and-so and go to so-and-so.
You know, it's funny, Bruce, saying that. Sometimes mystery writers, as you know, will get together and we'll talk about what we're doing, and eventually, after you've written a lot of mysteries, what happens is frequently the part of the writing that begins to grate on your nerves is the part that you feel that you need to do to advance the plot. And that is exactly what you're talking about. The sleuth, whether it's an amateur sleuth or a detective or a cop, has to go from this suspect to this suspect. Sometimes I just want to have the sleuth bring the first suspect into the room and say, did you do it? And the suspect says no, and the sleuth says, okay, next.
And you believe them immediately.
Right, and you believe them, and then you get that done in about a page, and then you go on to the sleuth's life.
Maybe there's something in that, in the old kind of cottage mysteries where they brought everybody together in the room at the end and they just eliminate all of these people.
It was pretty efficient if you get right down to it.
Yeah, maybe there was a means or an end to that means.
That's right.
You had a quote talking about, I was trying to think of the specific, here we go. And pardon me for putting this down here, but I wanted to get it right. I began reading books on quantum physics and discovered the second law of thermodynamics, which says that all things tend toward chaos. Well, that was certainly true of my closets, my drawers, my basement, and my car. Clearly, I was writing mysteries to impose a little order on the fictional universe, since I couldn't seem to manage it in the real one.
Yeah.
This is kind of what we've been talking about, but I was just wondering if part of your goal in writing mysteries is that the reader somehow at the end of it all feels better about themselves or has a better sense that there is a justice out there?
I think that's fine if the reader does. That's good news to me, but I never set out with that in mind. I don't actually think very much about who's going to read the book, which sounds sort of cold-hearted, but I think isn't, for the following reason. My feeling is that when people come back again and again and again to a series, it's because they love the character. And they love the character, or they don't, but if they do love the character, it's because the writer probably thinks the same way the reader does. And so what I hope is that by being honest about how I feel and how I think, that there will be enough readers out there who will identify with that they'll come to the books. So I don't really think, well, my readers want this, or I hope the readers feel this way. I just want to entertain myself and learn something about my own psyche, and that's how the book comes out.
So there's really no sense of tilting at windmills and trying to right wrongs in that sense of it. It's more the character is important, far more important.
In fact, I got to thinking recently, even as an amateur sleuth writer, I'm included under the general umbrella of crime writers. And I realized I'm not very interested in crimes. Criminals, for the most part, I think are kind of boring. My idea of an interesting criminal is the guy who goes into a bank and his "give me your money" note is written on the back of his own deposit slip. That's my idea of an interesting criminal. I think I'm not so much a crime writer as I am someone who's just exploring one character's life. Jeremiah Healy is an example of a private eye writer who is exploring one character's life, and I suspect that with more contemporary crime writers that's going on. With Miss Marple, for instance, or Hercule Poirot, I don't really feel that we explored their lives very much. They were real puzzle mysteries and plotted mysteries, and I loved them, but it was a different sort of animal altogether.
That's very true. Did you have any early writing influences when you were starting to write that kind of either propelled you in that direction or gave you a sense that that's the way you wanted to write?
I had a lot of early writing influences, and that's interesting to go back and think. In fact, I hadn't. Did any of them in particular propel me? Agatha Christie propelled me in one sense, and I almost hesitate to say this because it seems pejorative, and I have so much respect for that late writer. But I had read a lot of Agatha Christie's, and I'd reached a point, and you do, I think, with her wonderful books, that about the third chapter, you know who did it and what all the suspects are going to do in the book. At that point, when it stopped being fun, I thought, well, maybe I ought to try one of my own. But in another sense, I had read a lot more than Christie. I'd read diverse authors, as diverse as, say, James M. Cain and Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and John D. MacDonald, plus Dorothy Sayers and Niall Marsh and Josephine Tay, as well as a dab of romantic suspense like Mary Stuart, and lots and lots and lots of writers. And what I see in my own work that I don't necessarily think a reader would pick up or even have to is that all of these influences are in my books. There's a dab of romantic suspense. There are scenes that are practically stolen from private eye novels, if you think about it. I have a couple of books that begin in the classic private eye way, with the sleuth in his or her office, and in comes the client and sits down in a chair, and they talk about the case. All that's missing is the whiskey bottle in the drawer by the side and the 38 over here. And there is some psychological suspense. There are touches of that now and then in some of my books. So I have unabashedly stolen from all parts of the genre, I think, and I hope created a hybrid that holds together. When I first started writing, I knew I was doing this, And I knew I didn't want to be pinned down to just writing an amateur sleuth novel that people were accustomed to seeing, and I didn't want to write Private Eye. I knew I was trying to put all these different things into one bag and come up with something new. And it was tough at first. I think this is fun to talk to you about this, because I'm just realizing this is the case. At some point in my writing career, and I can't tell you what book it was, I stopped worrying about that. And so I think what must have happened is that the places where it felt uncomfortable to me, and maybe even seemed like an uncomfortable mix now and then to my readers, I don't know if that's the case, but maybe, eventually smoothed out, and maybe then whoever I am as a writer began to emerge from all these other influences.
Well, there certainly are, I find anyway, this mixture of genres, mystery, romance, suspense, all of that's pretty well apparent. And as I mentioned, I think sometimes the mystery is the least of those.
Yes.
I wondered if that you probably answered this too, if you regarded that there's a difference between the mystery genre and straight fiction. If there,
well,
like some
yeah,
people do.
I do think there is.
Do you find you think you fall more into straight fiction? Or
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think I still fall in the mystery field, because I still follow the necessity for having a dead body, for one thing, and investigating some sort of a crime, even in the books in which Jenny is more of an observer than she is a sleuth. So no, I don't really think I've crossed over that line into general fiction, at least not yet. I think I'm still a mystery writer, even if I'm sort of straining at the boundaries of that.
Stretching the envelope, as it were.
Yeah.
Oh. Jenny Cain, as the director of the Civic Foundation, the Port Frederick Civic Foundation, has that opened up a lot of realms of possibility as far as the different areas? Because it seems as though she could touch on a lot of different social aspects that way.
You're absolutely right. When I started writing the series, which, by the way, I didn't know was going to be a series until after the first book had been published, I knew I had a sleuth, and she was a female of a certain age, and she had a certain education level. And I was thinking about what sort of profession she should have, and I thought, well, I had had some experience with foundations, and I realized that where you have foundations, you have bequests, and where you have bequests, you have death, and wherever you have death and money mixing, that's a good mixture for mysteries. And so I thought a foundation director might be the thing for her to do. I have just barely touched the surface of the possibilities in foundation work. In the last couple of years, I have begun to meet more and more real-life foundation people, and they'll come up to me and say, you know, this and that and the other that you had in your books, I've had situations just like that, only let me tell you about something that's even wilder than that. And now I've reached the stage at which, for instance, the book that's out now, But I Wouldn't Want to Die There, I vetted that with a foundation director in California, and she corrected a couple of things that needed to be factually corrected, but essentially told me that my instincts about the various sorts of problems a foundation director might run up against were right on the mark, and if anything, I wasn't dramatic enough in some cases. So I'm going to start going around the country, every place I go, and talking to foundation people and say, well, now tell me about your most eccentric characters on your board, or the donors, or whatever.
Please air your dirty laundry.
That's
so
right.
We can see exactly
That's
what
right.
it's going to be in the next book, or something
right.
like that. I'd like to veer off and talk about Sisters in Crime a little bit. As I understand, you were one of the founders
That's
of
right.
Sister in Crime. Can you tell us a little bit about when it was founded, its history, why, and kind of the goal of the organization when it was founded?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm a little weak on dates, to tell you the truth. I think it was founded about 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And it was founded by Sarah Paretsky. And she was the instigating force with maybe 39 of us, I think that was the number, who were there at the first meeting. It was originally founded because at that time, the perception among a lot of women, essentially a lot of women who were new to the field, was that particularly American women mystery writers were not getting the advances, the attention, the advertisements, the publicity, all of that. And so we did some complaining about it. We thought we weren't getting sufficient review attention, and we did some studies about it. And at some point what happened, Bruce, was I think what happens to any effective social-minded organization, social issue-minded organization, which is at some point you've got to stop complaining about what other people allegedly have done to you, and you've got to start taking action yourself. And so what we started doing, frankly, was doing in-runs around the publishers. If we weren't getting the publicity we needed in order to have careers, we banded together. We pooled money. We pooled our expertise. We started, for instance, if several of us would win or be nominated for awards at a particular convention, rather than doing what no one of us could afford, which was to publicize that, and our publishers weren't interested in individually publicizing that, we'd pool our money and send out publicity that gave the notice about all of us at the same time. In the meantime, while this was going on, and those of us who are writers were benefiting from all of this, it began to grow incredibly in terms of readers who joined the organization. Until now, it's a 1,500 to 2,000 member organization internationally.
My goodness.
There are chapters all over the world, certainly all over this country. Some of them are almost entirely composed of readers and not writers, and it's turned out to be a great place for people, men and women, primarily women, but some men, who love mysteries written by women and who want to help promote them, to get together and talk about this particular part of the genre that they love.
Has the, it sounds as though some of that end around the publishers that you had to do at the beginning then isn't as necessary now. Has that really started to improve quite a bit over the 6 or so years it's been founded, or is it still a big problem for women writers to get the publicity and the reviews and the tours and so on?
Oh, we're doing much better. It really benefited most so far, those of us who were in the field early. We helped to get ourselves attention that then drew more serious interest from the publishers, who then began to kick in with the very things we had hoped for from the beginning. Now we still have the same situation, but new men writers do too, where at the beginning of careers, publishers still don't want to spend much money on you. So the organization still serves, particularly helps new writers who are just coming up in the same sorts of ways that it helped us, writers like me at the beginning too. Only now I hope they also have the benefit of the experience of those of us who have maybe 10 years seniority. You know, we're the old girls now.
Hardly that, I'd say, hardly that. But perhaps the Pathfinders, maybe a better way to put
That's a nice way to put
it. Sisters in Crime, does it have a sort of a parallel coexistence with the mystery writers, but the focus then is women? Because it sounds like some of the kinds of things that the Mystery Writers of America does is to attempt to help writers not necessarily get going, but, you know, get them information, get them contract information, and so on.
It's actually, on the day-to-day level, a very different sort of organization, and this may be to a great extent because Mystery Writers of America is writers, and although people who haven't been published yet can join, everybody's aiming to be published, where in Sisters in Crime, now we are predominantly readers. And so it does make a big difference in the organization. Of course, there's another wonderful organization too, Private Eye Writers of America, and I think they in a way may be more parallel to Sisters in Crime, because they too perceived, I believe, at one point that Private Eye Writers perhaps were going through a period in which they weren't getting the attention that was essential to them if their careers were to continue, and so they tried to bring attention to that part of the genre too. See, this all I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bruce.
No,
I was going to say this. So much of this comes out of the fact that a whole clump of us who were '60s kids came into the mystery field at the same time. Excuse me. And you know that generation, those of us who are in our 40s now, we can't let anything alone. We just have to take whatever exists and just shake it until things start moving again. We're arrogant, I think.
No, well,
activists is nothing else.
Activists would be a good word. I was thinking of an article that I read by Carolyn Heilbrunn,
yes,
who frankly strikes me as a little militant in her comments, but between her and I'm not sure exactly when she started publishing, but I know certainly Sarah Paretsky and Sue Grafton and you all came up about the same time, or started to sort of hit the scene about the same time. Maybe Grafton and Paretsky were a little earlier.
And I was a little behind all of them.
I wonder if I always have the take that Sisters in Crime started out to be sort of a feminist reaction, and it doesn't sound that was necessarily true, that it was more of a pragmatic, we need to get the information out.
Well, it was a feminist reaction. I would say that those of us who started the organization were feminists, still are, and it was a reaction. I guess what you're pinpointing there is that at some point, instead of just reacting and reacting in a negative sort of way, we just took matters into our own hands and started being positive about it.
So as a readers group, Sisters in Crime then can have some impact directly on the publishers and what they do, and by lobbying or whatever?
I think now the impact that has shown is that there's an incredible interest in mysteries written by women.
Mm-hmm.
That has an impact on publishers because that spells money.
Yeah, I know for my own taste, some of my favorite, this sounds like a very bad stereotype line, some of my favorite authors are women.
That's great. And I can't tell you how wonderful that is to hear, because when I started writing, it was common for me to go to a signing where I was signing my books and have somebody, usually it was a man, but it wasn't always a man, who would come up to me and say, I never read books written by women. Not just, and sometimes it was, I never read mysteries written by women.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I wanted to slug them, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought time will tell. And now we're more likely to have women, or men or women coming up, and by now they've read maybe several of my books and a whole lot of other women's books too, and we seem to be over that dreadful place that we were quite a few years ago.
There certainly is quality of character and plotting and structure, that should speak for itself, so
well,
I'm
I hope
glad to
so,
hear that.
and I think that's certainly true of the contemporary men writing mysteries as well.
Let's go back to Jenny Cain, as we're kind of veering off to
Sure.
Sisters in Crime quite a bit. In the afterword that you wrote for the reissue there of Generous Death, you said that Jenny inspires you.
Yeah.
How does she inspire you?
Jenny's bolder than I am. She started out, when she and I started out, she was 29 going on 30, and I think I was 36. Well, I'm aging more quickly than she is. She's the age now that I was when I started writing her. And she's had more years of the women's movement under her belt, which I did on purpose. I wanted her to have just that much more confidence, that much less defensiveness, that much more ability to mesh happily with men. And so sometimes in the past, when I have felt timid about certain things, I'd think, oh, come on, Jenny would be ashamed of you. I used to think of her as like a younger sister. Now I think of her more as the woman I might have liked to have been when I was her age. Now I will also say that I don't want to be Jenny. At this age, I'd much rather be who I am at this age than to be who Jenny is. For one thing, I don't want to trip over all those dead bodies. She has a much tougher life than I do. So I see places where the benefit of my age gives me some maturity that I think Jenny doesn't have. But I still think she's bold and she's confident, and part of her seeps into me and comes back out again.
That's interesting. I was going to ask if much of Jenny is you, but it's interesting to hear you say that she's coming back and affecting you in that regard.
Writers are very strange people.
I've noticed that. Delightful, though. More pragmatically, have you been approached for TV or movie
I've
spin-offs?
been optioned, as they say, once or twice, and none of the books are under option right now, which is, I just don't think about that very much. My guess is that Jenny's sort of stories would be made into the very sorts of TV that I actually don't watch. So how hypocritical would that be for me to want my stories to be turned into something I wouldn't watch? The truth is that I figure that my job's to write the books, and anything else that happens is gravy. There certainly are horror stories that come out from writers of their books being made into movies and TV, but even that doesn't particularly bother me, because that shouldn't affect what I'm doing with the books. Someday maybe they'll be turned into film, and someday they won't, and either way I'm a happy woman. So.
Well, that's good. It seems as though there are some mystery writers these days that you can actually hear in your mind as you're reading it screenplay.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean, and that may be actually one of the troubles, as it were, with getting my books on film. I don't think that way. I don't want to think that way. And some of the comments that have come back from people in Hollywood who've looked over the books have to do with the fact that it would be hard to film certain aspects of my book, which tend to be, a lot of it's in Jenny's head and introspective, and it'd be hard to get out onto film. But I'm not changing to please them.
Yeah, no. You recently also put out a book of a character, Eugenia Potter.
Yes.
That was originally a character by Virginia Rich.
Right.
How did you come to do that? The book was the 27-ingredient chili con carne murders, which is longer than the book itself.
That's right. Yeah. Well, actually, it was a story that had Twilight Zone a Twilight Zone feeling all around it. Years ago when I first started, I read Virginia Rich's first book, which was The Cooking School Murders, and I thought I saw a similarity of writing style between her first book and My Generous Death. I also noticed that there were various things about the books and the characters, minor points that were similar. And Mrs. Rich was a mystery writer who was married to a cattle rancher. At the time, I was a mystery writer who was married to a cattle rancher. And I thought, surely there can't be more than 2 of us on the face of the earth. So I wrote her what was essentially a fan letter. And I got a lovely note back from her in which she said, among other things, she was working on a book called The 27-Ingredient Chili Con Carne Murders. Well, shortly after that, Mrs. Rich died. And years after that, after I had nearly forgotten all of this, I got a call from my agent saying, how would you like to finish a book called The 27-Ingredient Chili Con Carne Murders? And the theme from The Twilight Zone went off in my head, and I thought, this is fate, and I have to do it.
Yeah, I know that it's been well reviewed. Again, romance and
That's right,
dollops of
adventure,
romance and so on. Yeah. So again, will you be continuing that series? Will you
I
be doing more?
wasn't going to, but I've had such a warm response from Mrs. Rich's fans, who seem to be really hungry for an older woman sleuth who's vital and active and even has a love life, that they really kind of touched me, to tell you the truth. And I thought, all right, I'll do a couple more of these, but not until I do a couple more Jennies. Okay, so and Jenny will always be my main interest.
So sometime, a couple of years in the future,
right.
maybe there'll be another Virginia
right.
Potter. In the mystery field in general, or the genre in general, it's hard to say these days. Who do you like to read if you find time to?
The trouble with answering that, of course, is that when you get in the mystery field, as you know, you discover it's all one village and everybody knows everybody else. So most of my best friends are in the mystery field. So if I name 1 or 2, I will have left out people.
Somebody's going to be saying.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you know, and it'll be suspicious whoever I name because they're all friends of mine. Right here in Minneapolis, you truly have a couple of my favorite mystery writers, or 2 or 3 or 4. Artie Zimmerman is brilliant. His Deadfall in Berlin, that won was nominated for an Edgar, was incredibly original. It was wonderful. Mary Logue has a wonderful new mystery out just this year. Kate Green from here is such a talented mystery writer. Who knows who else I'm leaving out just from the Minneapolis area? Yeah. But there's a start right there.
Oh, you're touching on some of my favorites as well. Just to wrap up, I just wanted to make a comment. I don't know if you know this, you may have heard this, but the new publication, The Reader's Guide to the American Novel of Detection, that was edited by Marvin Lockman. It's a whole sequence of books and so on that he's listed, short synopses. Most of your books are in there. But then at the end, he provides a list of the 100 best, in his opinion, 100 best novels of American detection. These are not professional police or private eyes. But he names both Generous Death and No Body as 2 of the 100 best novels of detection.
Well, bless his heart.
So I wanted to, on that note, say congratulations. Thank you very much for being here. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, Bruce. It was such fun.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.